Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. As you may know, I love to print and paint minis. In the last year or two, this hobby has exploded. There are tons of Kickstarter campaigns and Patreon pages selling STL files. Almost every day I hear about a new Kickstarter with cool models, but I have limited time, limited money, and limited resin, so I've got to be really picky. The models I'm working with today are special because they were designed by somebody who actually prints, and they print a lot. They know exactly what's possible with modern printers, and these minis are designed to make the most of that technology. Based on who designed these minis, I knew that they would be worth our time, so let's jump in. These minis are from the Fighter Kickstarter campaign from Greg of the 3D Printing Pro YouTube channel. He's got a ton of experience with various consumer-grade printers. He does supports and test printing for some of the big names in our hobby, and he's constantly making videos with little tips to get stuff to print right. These minis were designed from the start to look cool and to print well. For this project, Greg worked with several sculptors, and in particular, Chris Tackett. Both of the characters in this video were sculpted by Chris. If Greg does the supports on a model, they do their job, and they come off easily with minimal scarring. Here's a dragonborn paladin pit fighter. I put him in warm water for a moment, and then I peeled off his supports, easy as could be. When a model is designed well and supported well, the prep work can be really easy. That dragonborn was a mini that I printed myself on a Creality printer, but Greg also sent me a couple of works that he printed on his e-packs. And of course, something that will always bring me joy is that you can print minis at any scale you want. With orcs, bigger is better. In this video, I'm going to paint up a couple of dragonborn and a couple of orcs to show off some straightforward ways to paint them up quick and get them looking nice on the tabletop. I got these models primed and ready to paint. My standard technique is to do a prime with black and then come in from above with white ink through my airbrush for a zenithal highlight. This highlight really helps the camera to pick up on the details, and it's useful to evaluate the minis. As Greg and Chris were getting models ready for the Kickstarter, Greg was showing me some of the sculpts that they were working on. This dragonborn really grabbed my attention. I love the scales, I love the muscles under the scales, and I love the muscles on the breastplate. I've got a version of the dragonborn here with a short sword. This smaller weapon allows that awesome breastplate to be a more prominent feature on the model. I started off with deep red. Red dragons are the best dragons. Then a nice dark wash all over everything. When that was dry, I started some dry brush highlights with lighter and brighter shades of red. After I'm happy with the dry brush, I can start actually putting on some other colors. It was around this time that I realized I don't know what colors I want to use for the rest of the model. I was really excited about the scales and the lizard muscles, but then I drew a big ol' blank on everything else. That's alright, I'll slap some colors on there and see what happens. I changed my mind a few times, but eventually I settled on using a lot of dark steel color. Later on, I'll highlight that steel metallic up with a bit of bright silver. Again, I'm really excited about the manly dragon muscles on that breastplate. They look awesome, and I'm optimistic that I'll be able to highlight them up nicely. I was also excited to go in and do some targeted highlights on those lizard scales. The texture of this lizard skin came out great off of the printer. I went through and gave extra dots of bright red and orange on the scales of this guy that are going to be catching the most rays and glistening in the sun. Things were heading in a decent direction, but it wasn't quite right. It's time for this dragon man to get a truly magical sword. I painted it black and then edged it with white. Then I used a tiny brush to put some runes or something onto the flat of the blade. This is prep work for an attempt at a glow effect. On a whim, I upgraded this guy from a green belt to a white belt. Oh yeah, now he's looking wise. I used white contrast paint over a white base layer on the belt, and while all that was drying, I gave the guy one more pass with bright orange highlights for the scales. I love that dotted effect. Alrighty. The last step is to hit the dragon blade with a bit of bright blue through the airbrush. This is Minotaur Plasma Blue Ghost Tint. It's going to make the white marks on the sword look like blue glowy magic, and the overspray onto the rest of the model will hopefully work as a lighting effect. And yep, there it is. The silver breastplate looks like it's reflecting magic blue light. pretty cool, but I had really high hopes for this model, and I wasn't quite satisfied with the scheme I ended up with. I decided to try again. I started over with a blue dragon. Blue dragons are the coolest dragons. This time, I'm using the big double-bladed weapon. But to make it easier to paint the chest piece, I cut off one of the blades. We'll put that back on later. I got things started with an undercoat of blue and a dark blue wash. I made things a bit more interesting by following up with a wash of purple, but I only applied this to the underside of things, effectively building in some purple shadows. If things go well, I think it'll be really cool to see a transition from purple in the shadows to bright blue on the highlights. I did a few passes with the dry brush, building from medium blue to bright blue, and even working in a bright teal color. The scales really take the dry brush well. So far, I've done nothing that requires much skill, just washes and dry brushes. The model itself has done all of the work for me, and it's starting to look nice. Now it's a bit hard to notice because of how natural the transition turned out, but there's a fade from aqua on the tips of the upper scales, through blue, and down to purple in the shadows, all with just a few washes and a couple of passes with a dry brush. Once I was happy with those scales, I started to paint in all the other colors. I guess this dragon is gonna have red armor. The horns and claws got painted yellowy tan and washed with brown. I'm hoping that getting these primary colors spread around the paint job will give us a nice balanced look. The armor got a dark wash, and then I went in with bright red for targeted highlights. Off screen, I squinted really hard and got some eyes painted in. Then it was time to attach the other blade of his weapon and figure out what I was gonna do with it. It feels like I never have much inspiration when it comes to blades, but this is a magical warrior with a magical weapon. So you know what? Let's bust out the color shift paints. These are the shifters from Vallejo. They're meant to be painted over a black undercoat, and they look completely different when they're dry from when they're in the bottle. I actually made myself a little pile of color swatches to help when it's time to make choices like these. I picked 3 that I thought might look good together, and I got ready to slap them onto blades. The hilt, the blade, and the flare all got different colors. Even with the swatches, it's hard to know quite what this is gonna look like, so sometimes you just gotta paint bravely. Paint Bravely is the name of a podcast that I'm on. Check it out sometime. Anyway, these shifters paints are probably best when applied through an airbrush, and they're quite runny, but they can be painted on by hand. That runniness makes them pretty hard to control, but I can mostly get them to go where I want them to go. And as a final touch, I used regular silver paint to make the cutting edges sharp. And yep, this is a magical blade master. He's in dragon stance and ready for the fight to begin. Enough of all these dragonkin. It is orc time. Greg loves beefy models, and this orc is no exception. All of the characters in the Fighter Kickstarter are crazy jacked, especially this fellow. This guy is roided up in all the best ways. He's carrying a big silly cleaver, he's got veins popping out everywhere, and he doesn't even seem to notice those massive wounds. It takes a lot to stop this guy. I got him started with a deep green skin, blue accents, and brown leather. This character reminds me of a Warcraft orc, and we all know that the pauldron color is what determines which team this guy is fighting for. Of course, the classic choice is red armor for orcs, but this guy is gonna be blue. I will be using red in his mouth and in all those deep wounds. Greg, the 3D printing pro, wanted these characters to pop. There is nothing subtle about them. Look at the depth of the wounds and the height of those bulging veins. Partially, these are aesthetic choices to make the characters larger than life. These pit fighters have massive egos, and they're the best at what they do. The overemphasis on these key details also has the effect of making them easy to print and easy to paint. Somebody who's new to printing and painting is still going to be able to get these models to look good. I think this is one of the really interesting things about a Kickstarter campaign run by somebody who actually prints as much as the 3D printing pro does. He knows where modern printer technology is at, what textures and poses print well, and how to support models so that they come out looking exactly how they're supposed to. I think this batch of models would be great for anyone who's new to printing, new to painting, or both. The features on these models are bold and distinct, which is really helping me with my paint jobs. Base coats, a wash, and maybe just a teeny bit of extra work on the details and highlights is resulting in some nice looking models. On this orc, I did the base coats and a dark wash, and then I did try to get a little bit fancy. I'm trying to layer some smooth highlights onto his giant rippling muscles. I took my base green and mixed in a little Caucasian flesh tone. Orcs come in a variety of shades of green, and for this guy, I'm going for a more subdued look than I often do. I'm putting thin layers of the fleshy highlights in the center of the muscles, especially in the places where the sun is shining on this magnificent warrior. I decided to make his cuts just a bit redder, his veins just a bit bluer, and then I declared victory. We've got one more model, this same orc printed at a bigger scale. There's no way I'm not painting this lad. For him, I want to lean all the way into that cartoony Warcraft look. I want popping green skin and a red shoulder pad. I'm going to allow myself to start that green with my airbrush. I'm starting with dark green in the shadows, middle green everywhere, and yellow green on the high points. For this, I'm using some Vallejo Game Air colors. I try not to oversaturate my videos with the airbrush, but it really is a great tool. It's so quick and easy to get nice looking color transitions. I did a final highlight with straight yellow ink to really brighten up the green and make it pop. Finally, I loaded up my airbrush with a bit of translucent red-brown ink. I'm working this color into the shadows, and I think it's going to give a lot of visual interest to the character. And yeah, I'm loving this effect. I liked the first 3 minis they did in this video, but I can already tell that I'm going to love this one. This mini printed as 2 parts, the orc and his cleaver. For the cleaver, I started off with a really bright silver metallic. I sprayed on just a bit of muted violet ink in some areas, and then some muted blue ink in others. Finally, I added a bit of that same red-brown ink to tie everything together. This is such a huge cleaver that I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just one single flat color. After the 3 inks, I sealed it up with some spray-on varnish to protect those delicate layers. This will help when I use a wash later on in the process. Next, I grabbed a big size 8 brush and got to work on the rest of the base coat. I started with that classic red pauldron and then took my time with some gray leather and some brown leather on the rest of the model. This boy gets a purpley red for his wounds. His popping veins are a mixture of the green colors I used for his skin and just a bit of azure blue. He gets buff yellow teeth tipped in parchment. Meanwhile, I painted his hands green. This is probably the scariest moment, seeing if the green that I'm brushing on looks anything like the green that I airbrushed on. We'll find out soon. I washed his weapon with Nuln Oil, and when that was dry, I glued the 2 big pieces together. The color of the hands don't quite match yet, but luckily it's time to wash the skin with green-brown military shader. This should add more volume to the muscles and make the hands look a bit more like the rest of the orc. I used dark red to wash his pauldron, and then dark brown to wash his boots and leather bits. After I did his eyes, I came in with Scorpy Green to give some bold highlights to his face. I used this same bright yellow green to highlight the ragged edges of his wounds. I was about to load up a brush with a lighter brown to highlight some of those leather straps, but then I realized that old Grok here is perfect just the way he is. The face pops and the whole model looks balanced. It's time to quit while I'm ahead. Grok looks great. This boy is bright and colorful, and he reminds me of orc grunts from my childhood. It's time for glamour shots. I ended up with 3 small models and 1 big boy. The prints on all these models were great, and they painted up easily. I used a lot of simple, straightforward painting techniques with just a couple of fun tweaks here and there. I really love the dragonborn sculpt. That pose is epic, I love the face, and those textures are quick and easy to paint. I still don't think I've quite found the perfect color combination for him though. Maybe someday. For the orc though, I definitely found what I was looking for. The subdued skin tone with the blue pauldron looks pretty good, but it turned out that it wasn't quite what I was in the mood for, Now, that bright yellow-green with a red-brown in the shadows, that is delightful, and I'm going to be looking for more excuses to put that to use. The highlights on his face are so crude and bold, but they really work for this brute. This big orc really makes me happy. I'm gonna have to find a cool place to put him. As of this recording, the Pit Fighter Kickstarter is still open, so feel free to check that out if you're looking for some beefy models that print well and paint well. There's way more characters than the ones I showed today, and I think there's even a free sample. Again, the sculptor who worked with Greg on this project is Chris Tackett. I'm really impressed with these designs, and I'm definitely going to be following his work from now on. As a final plug, if you're just getting into 3D printing, the 3D Printing Pro is a great YouTube channel to go to for honest printer reviews and really practical tips for getting nice looking prints. Hopefully, some of the painting techniques I used for these pit fighters gave you some ideas and inspired you to get going on your next project. That's all I've got for today though. As always, thank you so much for watching.